Hey there, listeners. I am trying to give you national land gear. Submit a review of this podcast on Apple Podcasts, good, bad, or in between. We'll be reading these reviews on the next podcast and picking our favorite. We'll be selecting the winner in March of 2023, and we will base the winner on enthusiasm and originality. So be sure to submit those reviews on Apple Podcasts. Welcome to episode number 31 of the National Land Realty Podcast, where we discuss all things land. Our goal here is to inform, educate, and entertain those of you who own land or are interested in the buying and selling of land throughout the United States. My name is Mac Christian, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer here at National Land Realty. I'll be your host for this episode. In this episode, I'm talking with Trey McCallie out of Lexington, Kentucky, about what land professionals bring to the table and why you want to work with one. Land professionals, land agents, or any other name you might hear are specialists who work with land as opposed to residential real estate. These specialists come with a variety of backgrounds, and their focus is on land, whether it be recreational, hunting tracts, farms, or ranches. Their skills are indispensable to landowners or prospective buyers. We'll give you some insight on how they work. Now sit back and enjoy. I am sitting here with Trey McCallie out of Lexington, Kentucky, and really, we're kind of going into sort of what land agents do and why you want to work with one, which is sort of a basic. I want to call it a basic concept, but I think a lot of people just haven't worked with one like a specific. It's a real estate agent, but specializes in land. But Trey, tell me, how did you end up with National Land, and how did you end up specializing with land in the first place?
Well, I've traditionally been a residential agent for probably 13 or 14 years, and I got a call off of LinkedIn from this guy named Logan Eaton, who's our vice president of sales. And he told, we talked for a while, and he told me a little bit of the National Land story, and I was definitely intrigued. I had never really focused in on something like that, being a traditionally residential agent. He and Jason did a presentation for me. I'm a Virginia Tech fan, so they were getting ready to play Clemson that week. So I got there was a little orange on that video that day giving me a hard time, and then Clemson pulled it out, but I still continue to talk with those guys. But it was just a really intriguing concept for me where I sit in Kentucky. I mean, Lexington's a nice mid-sized city, but 5 minutes out the door, we have tremendous, horse farms and land resources and timber and recreational. So I knew that there would be a huge opportunity in Kentucky, and it just seemed like the next step in my career.
Yeah, and it's a unique circumstance because a lot of the people I know that we recruit are specifically in land, and so jumping with you from the residential perspective, what was the biggest difference to you as far as like you've got to shift your paradigm a little bit when you look at specifically land as opposed to residential? What was that shift like for you?
Well, I think, coming from residential MLS business, there are a ton of rules. There's a ton of documentation. There's a ton of disclosures. And once I stepped out of that world, I mean, we still have all the ethics of the National Association of Realtors and things like that. But land in Kentucky is kind of the wild, wild west a little bit. I mean, we'll go out me and my team will go out on listings, and, they don't have a survey. They inherited the land from their grandfather. So sometimes there's a lot of research to be done. And in some of the more rural counties, none of that information is online. So we've had some fun road trips to different courthouses and property evaluation administrators here in Kentucky, because you can't just pull it up on your computer. You've actually physically got to go there and find the info. So I think that was the biggest change. Being able to market it for land from a national perspective was a big difference as well. I mean, obviously our MLS goes up on Zillow and residential listings go up there, but residential realtors typically market themselves in their local area.
Yeah. And it seems, and this is where, it's good to talk to you just coming from that background, but the life cycle of a transaction is much longer with land. Mm-hmm. instead of going out and touring, 10 properties in a day or whatever, and checking out houses, you pick out one, and it could take you all day. It could take 2 days to tour a good size.
Got to get the side by side out there, and have your boots on and be ready to maybe climb some fences or avoid animals or whatever it is. But yeah, I think residential is such a faster sales cycle. 30-45 days we're closing. 30-45 days we're closing. But in the commercial and land world, it's a different pace of life. Lots of due diligence up front. The due diligence periods are usually longer, because it takes a while for us to get a surveyor in, or a soil survey, or whatever that is. So yeah, that is a definite pace and mindset shift.
And you spoke to something as far as land in Kentucky being the wild, wild west. And I think that it goes this way in several, I would say a majority of the states, when you're talking about land where you have land that deals were done on handshakes, 100 years ago. And you can't find that in papers. And what we're talking about is like conveyances that were done in the past, things like that. What are you typically looking for that even a landowner might not know that they have? What's the typical things that you find that are hangups in that process?
Well, I think just, verifying things through deeds, going to the courthouse and doing the research. Our tax billing guy in Kentucky is called a property valuation administrator, and they have one in every county. But obviously in the rural, like in Fayette County where Lexington is, they have a staff of 20. But in McCreary County, Kentucky, they have probably one guy. And so those sources of information are usually very knowledgeable. Even if something's not documented, they may know about it and be able to tell the story of the property behind there. And, obviously online we have, National Land has tons of resources online for us to at least get a good idea of the property before we start talking to the seller. But yeah, there can be some hangups. We've got a really good title partner here in Kentucky named Bridge Trust Title, and we've given them some challenging deals, and they have done a great job searching the title and getting everybody comfortable to be able to close on the property. But yeah, there's a lot of properties that, somebody's grandfather traded with another grandfather, 20 acres. It was a handshake agreement, and that's all you needed back then. And, but when we need to record that and document that, we just don't have that documentation. So sometimes it takes a little skill to hone in and find, make everybody, buyer and seller, comfortable before they transfer the property.
Yeah. And so, and you mentioned some challenging deals. And obviously without going into any like confidentiality or anything, but
right.
what makes a particular deal challenging, or maybe a couple examples? Because obviously what makes something challenging changes every time you get a new deal.
Yeah. Lately, our team has run into a lot of properties that have no survey on them. And sometimes there's some ways around that. But if there's bank financing involved, or the title company wants to do a certain kind of title insurance, we've got to have a survey. And once you get to a certain amount of acreage, surveys can be very expensive. And we've had to negotiate that with seller and buyer. We had a seller recently that just didn't have, they were going to make their money off their land because I think it was inherited, but they absolutely didn't have the money to pay thousands of dollars for a survey. So that's kind of one of our hangups. We've done some deed plat surveys through the title company, which is using deeds to kind of draw the picture of what the survey should look like. And, I could show you some titles too that are, they literally are like the guy Max sleeping against the pole, turn right. It's literally like things that may not even be there anymore that they're using to try to give us a legal description. So some of it's kind of comical, but yeah, I think, just trying to drill down on what exactly it is. Because we had one the other day with Billy Hackworth that, we weren't even really sure what we were trying to sell. And he was just trying to drill down on that with the seller and the title company. So that can be a challenge.
You mean like as far as like it's an old survey where they were supposed to use sort of like a meets and bounds description, but the tree that you identified.
There's no survey. Yeah.
Oh, there's no survey. Okay.
There's no survey. That's the thing. We don't have a survey. All kidding aside, our PVAs the PVA map is usually pretty close, but it's not a legal survey. So if the buyer's lender is requiring a survey, then, we've got to negotiate that with buyer and seller. But yeah, sometimes we just don't have any survey. We have a general idea of where the land is. And then sometimes we also have sellers that are cutting off 20 acres off a 500 acre tract. And so they just think they can draw a line there and then sell that to the buyer. And, the title company and the lender usually have different ideas on that. So, I mean, those can be the challenges, just verifying what we're trying to sell.
Gotcha. And that's kind of going back to the comparison gets made a lot, and we make that a lot on this podcast is the tools at the disposal or the knowledge at the disposal of somebody who specifies in land. And, we use the term land professional, but right. Industry wide, like we're just talking about a real estate agent. A real estate agent can sell land, can sell, commercial, can sell, those kind of types of things. But there's certain designations that you can have to enhance those credentials and stuff. But at the end of it, we're talking about real estate, and it's easy to say, I know somebody that works in real estate. I'm going to work with this land deal with them. And then they bring somebody on that, sells specifically residential houses. And, right. And, you've been there, right? And, and they go and they sell a ranch and they have absolutely no idea, they probably don't have to go back into records, 100 years to look at conveyances to see if you still have mineral rights or something like that. Right. Yeah. There's
definitely some challenges there. And I mean, we're ethically required to, throw our hands up if, you don't want me selling you an industrial property because I don't, I have zero knowledge of that. And, I had sold some land in my residential career, but I mean, there definitely has been a great learning curve with national land. I mean, I had a cattle farm listed here in Kentucky and was having some challenges with it, and was recommended to one of our brokers in South Carolina that was the cattle farm expert. So our whole company leans on each other to the guys in the Midwest are the farmland experts. That's who I would call for that. So we really have a nice wide array of talent, and the guys and girls all over the country are always willing to share and help you when you maybe running up against something that you're not as experienced at.
Yeah. So, and just from my background in small towns, and I come from an area that's very, very, town I grew up in had 500 whole people.
Right.
And things that I notice out of towns like that are there's a suspicion, right? Of,
yep.
If you come into the area or you're making an introduction, I mean, my favorite thing to talk about is I went back home once and there was somebody that I grew up with, and like from the time we were 13, I moved to that area and right. Went back a few years after graduation, and I was like, "Hey, how's it going?" And they just looked at me and like long pause, and they leaned in. They're like, "You're not from here anymore." I didn't know I could take that back, but
yeah, I didn't know that could stop ever. I mean, I'm always from here, but
I'm always kind of, but there's an insulation there, and it's hard to, as you meet new people and as you gauge it, people being comfortable with somebody who is working and like potentially selling their land, because people are protective. Land means a lot to people, and to get in that front door. And so educating them on, hey, you might know like a real estate agent, but land agent's going to help you out a lot better. And you might not know them up front, but so I guess that, this is like a really meandering way to get there. But what I wanted to ask you was, what are the things that a landowner wants to target or wants a land agent to have, or knowledge or skill sets? What are they looking for so that they can evaluate?
Yeah. Well, and I was laughing about your comment about your hometown, because in Kentucky, they look at you and say, "Y'all ain't from around here, are you?" And they can tell that in 2 seconds. My cattle farm client was a salt of the earth guy, but he took me one day. We were looking around at his land, and then he's like, I'm going to take you to lunch. And he took me to lunch at the local Greasy Spoon, which had about 10 guys in there, and they all looked like they probably ate lunch there every day. So as soon as I walked in with my National Land shirt on, the whole place was staring at me. And he introduced me to everybody, and they were nice, but that you could definitely tell the eyeballs in the room as soon as I stepped plate, because that town was probably like your hometown. It probably had like 500 people, so they knew I wasn't from around there. But I think the people that I've met to go talk to about listing their land, they want to know that they can trust you. I think they like it when you take it slow, and I always try to, let the client be the guide, and the client be the star of the show, and I try to make sure they know that I'm the guide. So I think building that relationship, because you're right. This could be, I listed one that had been in the family since the, I think, early 1800s. So it had been their family a long time. They were nervous about selling it. They wanted to do the right thing for the legacy of their family. And so those are important things to understand. But I also think they want marketing. I mean, they want the property to be presented well. They want, I've always told sellers that I think it's really important to have a really realistic preview of the land, so you don't get 600 people coming to look at it. They can do a flyover or land tour 360 or drone video, and people have a pretty good idea of what they're coming to look at long before they do. And I think that brings us more serious prospects. I think our website getting, I think they said at our summit last week, we had 100,000 hits a month. I mean, I think we're getting eyeballs all over the country and the world. And I think they want us to do the right things for them, and they want us to put together a marketing plan and a package that they can be, comfortable with. I think those are the really important things, and make good suggestions to them. Be an advisor to them, because some of the people we're talking to own thousands and thousands of acres, and they could be a really good relationship for us. But, we've got to, some people will list their 25-acre tract before they give you the big tract. So I think it's important for us to, be there every step of the way, no matter what it is.
You spoke to something just then about, as far as one, trust, but two, like the type of relationship it is. Mm-hmm. How often are you communicating with not just, a seller after that, you exit the transaction, but the new land buyer or land buyers in your area, even when it doesn't involve a transaction, where they're asking you about local resources, surveyors, things like that? Is that pretty typical?
Yeah, I try to tell people at the closing that this is not the last time you're going to see or hear from me, because I'm not a transactional agent. And I want all my guys here in Kentucky to maintain relationships with people, because first of all, it's a great source of referrals for us. But, people do need things. They need a good attorney. They need a guy that can cut the hay, that they need a good fence guy. I mean, so there's all kinds of contractors that we have that we can help them with. We try to do some touches every quarter to our past clients. But we think that's really important. A phone call every now and then, a Christmas or a birthday card. I mean, I've had some clients say, I never thought I'd hear from you this much again, because none of the other realtors that we've ever worked with have followed up like this. But I think that's really important, and it drives a lot of things for us, and it shows our value to the client.
That's always one thing. And that's something that, I was familiar with residential fairly well before, coming on board with National Land. And it's something that I've gotten my head around as I've been here a while now, that, when you look at like a residential relationship, and I worked with I have a agent here in my area in Idaho that I've used a couple times now, and
right.
The guy's amazing, but residential tends to be more transactional. Like you go in, you do the negotiation process, you buy the new house, and agent is out, because residential is a volume business. It's usually, faster transaction cycle. The house hits the market, it's gone, and then you move on to the next deal, and they're working on like 20 other deals at the same time. They don't have time to follow up. Land is slower, and we really act as land consultants, where you have this Rolodex of resources that's always kind of there. So it's sort of a longer term thing. It is a relationship, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, we could have, because we try to get listings for a year or two, depending on the complexity of the sale and the complexity of the tract. Our listing agreement can be for a while, but we feel those relationships are super important, and we don't want to just drop somebody as soon as the closing's over.
Yeah. Well, and so how important is it that somebody finds somebody that specializes in a specific area versus somebody who knows the right people? I mean, is there a difference, or, because not everybody's a forester, right?
No, I'm definitely not.
Right. So is it just that you have a steep Rolodex of people that you refer to, or is that where the effectiveness lies?
Yeah, I think in my time here, I've asked, because we have some foresters by trade on our sales team at National Land, and so I've asked them a lot of questions because I've had some good timber tracts that I'm trying to sell. So I've asked those guys lots of questions. We had a class here in Lexington that Ronnie Richardson put on for us, and we had two of the foresters come and teach us some basics at least, so we could sound intelligent. But yeah, I think it's really important for us to admit what we're good at and then have resources for what we're not good at. And I come more from the sales side than anything else. So there are lots of land resources that I've developed over my time here to help our clients. But yeah, I think that's very important. And I think the network, like you said, I think that's important too, because we can get the properties out there to some, because I have lots of timber guys that have contacted me. So if I get a timber listing, I've got a whole list of timber guys that I can send it to that have been looking at timber in Kentucky.
What have you found that in your area that has been the most important way to get a listing seen? Everyone's got their own marketing ideas and everyone has their own kind of, like, I call it the new shiny, right? It's like,
right.
People will go front and center with something. They're like, hey, I have this. And when it comes down to it, everybody gets a listing. Everybody puts it out into a network. Everybody, I call them, their aggregator sites, right? So you put it out on, and whether it's MLS, which MLS really is just a way to get it on the Zillow, maybe in my mind.
Right. That's right.
Because MLSs are always going to be local, but you want that national exposure for something. Like, everybody does those things no matter what industry they're in. But what are some of the other things that you have found that really are beneficial to the client?
I think video probably is my number one, because when I even if I post a silly video with my kids to Facebook, or I post a video of a drone flying over a timber tract, for example, as soon as I post it to the different social medias, the number of views is unbelievable. We were talking about this at Summit last week. You may only have 2 or 3 likes or anybody identifying themselves, but then you see the views, which you can't see if it's somebody hitting it over and over again or whatever. But I mean, I'll never forget posting a video of a listing, and it had like 700 views within 6 hours. I posted it maybe at like 4 in the afternoon, and by 11 o'clock when I was going to bed, it had like 700 views. So I think people watch video. I mean, my wife watches reels like over and over and over again, for hours, and she's a very busy person, but reels even suck her in. And so I think the video is critical. I think our people love looking at our land tour 360s, but I think those are probably the most important things to me.
Yeah, you mentioned land tour, and that's one. I talk about how people have like the new shiny, and there is every real estate agency, whether it's residential, land, whatever, is going to talk about something shiny. Like we have a TV show, we have we have this great website, we have. So our company came up with Land Tour 360, which is a way to 3-dimensionally tour a low level photograph from a drone. And they geo-coordinate that with property boundaries and points of interest, which is, so far, I've seen people try to copy it so far, but so far our company has been the only way to pull it off. What it allows you to do is, instead of looking at a Google map or Google Earth to see the topo, you're just looking at the actual photo, and you're able to zoom in, fly around, and you can zoom into ground level and see what it looks like on the ground. Yeah. And the videos it's a total 3D tour of a piece of land, which is crazy, but it enables people to shop for this land from across the country. We've had several listings that have been sold sight unseen because they toured it virtually, right?
That's right.
How beneficial is that? I mean, because it's fancy, but like, let's be real. Has it worked for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, especially for Billy Hackworth down in Southern Kentucky, I mean, he's done a great job with his. Even I remember a couple months ago, he even had a small tract, maybe 5 acres, and I kind of laughed that he did it. But he does them on all his listings, and he gets his listings sold. And even the 5-acre one, had a lot of detail in it. He had the points of interest with photos, and I think there was a little stream that went through there. So he had a video of the stream, and it's just, you really get, it's really sticky. I mean, people want to look through those, and even if you're not particularly interested in that area, I mean, you just can't help yourself but look at those and the points of interest in there. So he's done a fantastic job with his.
Yeah, that's, I think, we made an ad pitch, and it was not as effective as I wanted it to be, but I still thought it was valid, was by utilizing the land tours, you're saving on a ton of gas when gas prices were shooting through the ceiling. Yeah. You don't have to fly out here or drive around. You can just tour this online.
$4 a gallon will keep you on your computer looking at videos and land tours.
Yeah, you got to do your diligence, or at least you have to want to know that it's really what you're looking for, and you can't tell that just from photos. And there's still no substitute for walking the property and physically seeing it, but it sure does get you a long way there toward understanding what it's all about before you show up to ride on the side by side. Yeah, so I wanted to ask you too. We're talking about what a land professional brings to the table. And so I guess that's a good way to just like put you on the spot, on cue. It's like, what do you, not just you in particular, but that's a good way to put it, is like, what do you bring to the table as a land professional?
Well, I think, I really care about my clients. I used to say I treat my clients like family, but then I realized how many dysfunctional families there were out there. So I had to be careful with that statement. But I really, I want the client to feel good coming out of the transaction. I want to add value to them. I want to do more than just stick a sign in the ground and put it on the MLS. I want to market the property. I want them to, know that I'm out there every day trying to sell their land. I look for different marketing angles. I mean, I had one guy one time, he said, well, what are you going to do to you're doing all this cool national stuff and putting it on your website and all that, but what are you going to do locally? And I was like, well, I figured out that the local paper here in town comes out once a week and everybody reads it. So I'm going to put an ad in there. I don't normally, when I'm in Lexington, I don't put an ad in the paper because nobody reads the paper anymore. But here in, XYZ, Kentucky, they read this local paper for all the, divorces and funerals and whatever else is in there.
On that gossip.
Yeah, you got to catch them on that gossip. So I'm going to put a nice ad in that paper, and and I had some calls from it. So we just try to look at all the angles, where the property is, and it's about where are the eyeballs that are going to look at this property. That's where you have to go from. You have to go from where the potential buyers are looking, and we got to get in the way of those buyers. So that's how I look at it. And I don't do anything the seller's not comfortable with, but I try to have a plan for them that's hopefully more impressive than who I'm competing against for the listing.
So here's a question for you. And you mentioned the local marketing, and I think this is an important one for anybody looking to buy or sell. And it's probably sort of a leading question, so I'll set you up like that.
I need the layup.
I'll throw it. Throw me an alley-oop. I gotta catch you.
Yeah.
No. So how often do you see when you're listing a transaction, when you're listing a chunk of land, whether it be ranch or whatever. And I realize the larger scale the listing, the more likely that the buyer is going to be, outside of the state or even international. But a typical piece of land, how often do you see the transaction take place within the local area? Like it's a neighbor or just someone down the lane. Is it fairly often that it's that, or is it usually out of the area? Well,
with large tracts, I think because I had a property listed out at Lake Barkley, and the seller kept telling me the owner, the guy next door has been trying to buy it for years, so you need to contact him. So I did postcards to, I think, the 200 closest landowners to him to cover my bases on that. Looking at our deal flow in Kentucky and what, the closings we've had, I'd say we have more out of state than not. Or if they're buying a tract in Eastern Kentucky, they're from Northern Kentucky up near Cincinnati, but they're not necessarily local. So, I don't have stats on that, but I think it's more outside the area. And unfortunately in some of our more rural counties, the economy, the coal business has really hurt us. And so sometimes there aren't a lot of people close by that can swing buying it. So.
See, that's where the layup backfires. So I was moving off of it. There's a lot of statistics out of, and it's especially more towards the Midwest, where I see a lot of the land purchases are done by usually neighbors. I always kind of joke that people, it surprises me not being in the Midwest and stuff. Like a lot of it, I joke that it's like kids trading Pokemon cards. It's like the way that people swap land. And
yeah.
Well, a lot of land swapping out there.
And I think, and I've had lots of clients who are like, Billy Bob down the road or Sam down the road has talked about buying it. And I was like, well, normally if they're serious about buying it, they'll make a move on it before now. And we still market to them. But sometimes I find that those don't come to fruition. We end up selling to someone further away.
Right. So as far as, you've been working in your area for a while, what are some things that landowners and sellers, buyers, either side of the deal, what are some things they should watch out for when working with somebody, when they bring somebody to the table, or when they're considering somebody, like a lot of the times the relationship starts because of a referral, like, hey, you need to work with this person. So there's an automatic level of trust there, and trust.
Yes, there's no better level of trust than a referral.
Right. So somebody's been referred to you as a buyer or a seller. What are some things that you should be looking for that could be red flags?
Well, I think, there are lots of scammers out in our world for everything now. So, some of the online people you've kind of got to try to get on the phone or not just converse by email. There's a residential guy right now that's trying to get all the realtors in our area hooked up on Bitcoin, but he starts off saying, I want to buy a $3.2 million house and this and that, which of course gets everyone's attention. But then, he flips it to, I want, have you ever thought about crypto and all that kind of stuff? So I think you've got to, it's very cruel to realtors, but, so I think you've got to dig in on people and get to know them. Obviously you want to, make sure that they have the pre-approval or are financially able to even, to talk about the property. And we have some sellers out there that are pretty they're suspicious of us, and they're suspicious of the buyers that are coming to look at their property. So, we've got to raise their comfort level quickly, and I have sellers that will ask me, well, Mac's coming to look at this property. What does he want to do with it? And I was like, it's kind of none of your business, but we'll find that out. So, I think just digging in on both parties. I've had some people call me that didn't even own the property. I mean, they called and I wrote the address down and I pulled the tax record up, and I couldn't even be talking to them because they weren't the owner. And a couple times it's the tax records haven't been updated or something like that. But I just think you've got to dig in on what the property is, what who the people are. I think buyers need to take their time. I mean, I think I'm in no rush to push them through this transaction. You guys, you want to get a soil study, you want to get a survey. Let's do our due diligence and let's take our time with the due diligence. That's good for the seller. That's good for the buyer. When everybody gets to the closing table, everybody feels comfortable. So I think that's probably the most important part. And, digging in, and, I try to answer a lot of questions through, my listings on the website. I mean, I try to have a lot of information out there rather than the old school thing where I, take away some information. So you have to call me, but I think it's important to have lots. And then if they have really good questions when they call me, and I certainly can help them dig in on that to make sure that we have the right answers for them. But I think finances, inspections or due diligence period are important. And just, making sure it's the place that you want to be. If you want to come out and walk it 3 times, let's do that. Let's take this slow. It doesn't, some people are in such a rush to get to closing, and and of course, like we were talking about earlier, the residential side is 30 and 45 day closings, and people can be in a real rush through that. But I always want everybody to be comfortable when we get to the table.
How do you identify a bad land agent?
Well,
let's say, how do I define it? Maybe we should lean on the positive side. How do you identify the good ones? But I'm thinking from the client perspective. How do I identify the person I'm talking to?
Well, I think you ask them what your marketing plan is, what's your general marketing program, and what's your specific plan for this property. Because I go into every listing appointment with a plan. Here's the general things that we do, and then here's some specific things that I know are going to work with your property that we're going to do. We always joke that there are agents that believe in the 3 Ps. Put a sign in the yard, place it on the MLS, and pray that it sells. And so we've got to do better than that, and we've got to do a lot better than that. There are so many resources available to us: professional photography, drone video, land tour. I mean, there's just so much that we can do to really make a property shine. Even in Billy's case, when he had a 5-acre property, I think I was so impressed with the job he did, and it ended up selling quickly. So.
So we just had our national convention for anybody listening that is not aware of that. And something I kept on saying that I feel like you just spoke to a lot of, is you are who your resume says you are. And so one of the things that you can do, if you're trying to vet, the land agent that you're working with, go look at their other listings or the other places that they've sold, and make sure. So you mentioned specifically taking care of questions with the property description. Like, are they good property descriptions? Is there good photography? Are they doing drone videos? Somebody tells you they're going to do a drone video on your listing, and you go look at all the properties they have listed and there's no drone videos. Like, you might be the first one they're doing. You don't know how good that's going to be. There's all kinds of things like that. Like, people can make all the promises in the world, but what have they done in the past?
Yeah. And I think it's interesting when I look back at my YouTube channel from a couple of years ago, there's still views coming through on the drone video of I just do we put the raw drone video up there with the logo and everything. And people are still looking from 4 years ago. So those things do build a resume for you, and sellers are, they are doing a lot. I mean, I've walked into listing appointments and they know everything about me. They know my bio. They know, they know where I went to college. I mean, so people are really researching you now. So if you walk in unprepared, they're gonna run you over.
Oh yeah, that's the advantage and disadvantage nowadays of everyone being so technologically inclined. It's just,
right.
that anybody can virtually stalk you anywhere and figure out what you're about.
It bothered me when he was quoting my credit score, but it's whatever it takes to get the listing. So
it could be good and bad, right?
Yeah. I think that day it was up, so it was okay.
There we go. So for some behind the scenes sort of perspective, what goes into it when you acquire a new listing? And you were talking about the areas where some of the county records are just one person in a small building, like on state pay, and they're there. What do you do? Like, how do you get the information that you need to get about for people that don't know?
Yeah, I've told my team to go and see the guys. So if if they don't have a website with a lot of information, you gotta knock on his door and go in and talk to them. We find that those guys in Kentucky, the PVAs, are great resources of information for us, but they're usually stretched pretty thin just because they can be, and they've got lots of information to coordinate and try to get in the system. But we find going to see them, and it's just like anything else. If Mac the seller is mad at me, you need to go see him. No text, no phone. And same with PVA and other local resources. I say go and see them and get the because people will tell you the real story in person usually.
Yeah. So you're going in there and you're saying, I've got this parcel.
Yeah.
And
we just go in there and say, hey, we're getting this new listing. You may know about it. And we have a big one right now that, Michael, my agent, went in and talked to the guy, and he's been the PVA in that county for a long time, and he had the whole backstory on it. And that really helped us with a lot of different things, both politically and just being able to market the property and help answer buyers' question. But that guy had the whole history on it. So that was a valuable use of Michael's time to walk in there and have a conversation.
That's probably also good to know, because you can get some of the county gossip. Like, okay, here's something you need to know. If there's a new buyer coming in, they can't put up a high fence on this side because the other neighbor will burn it down.
That's right. I mean, those are those kind of, when we show up, we may not know that, but those are those nuances we can find out through those conversations.
That's it's useful to know, especially for somebody looking at buying in a new area. You want to make sure to work with somebody who actively knows, to utilize those county resources and be able to find things. And I mentioned conveyances too. There could be things that the landowner thinks that they have that they really don't, and it's not in the paperwork.
Well, or they're worried that they've lost their deed and they can't sell the property without their old deed, and it's not like a car title, so we usually have to settle them down on that. But I went to a courthouse down in southern Kentucky, and it was the deed room and the marriage license room. So I was hearing some interesting conversations of people getting their marriage license, and I was working on my deeds. It was hard to concentrate. That
would be hard to concentrate. There's a lot going on in that room.
Oh yeah, it's quite an edgy. But the ladies in the deed room at most county courthouses also are very good resources of information. I mean, they know a lot of things too.
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, hey, so let's say a buyer or a seller in your area wants to get a hold of you. How do they do that? What's the best? What area do you work, man?
So I'm in central Kentucky where Lexington is, and I mainly work, kind of Lexington and the surrounding counties. And we have other members of my team that are in Northeast Kentucky, Louisville, down south near Lake Cumberland. We're getting ready to get a guy in Eastern Kentucky. So we've got kind of the two-thirds of Eastern Kentucky well covered, and we'd love to work with you. But numbers 859-312-7599 and T McCallie at nationallandrealty.com.
And what kind of do you have any special niches that you work in that might be unconventional, or what's your typical?
Mostly, I would say recreational and timber is what I've kind of come to focus on. But we've done some farms and some commercial as well.
I was really hoping you were going to say bourbon production.
Well, I'm really trying to break in there, because that's obviously big money. But I've got, if you need a bottle of bourbon, I can usually find it, because I've got some really good sourceless, highly placed. So if anybody needs help with that, I can usually find what you need.
I'm going to keep that number on hand here.
Yeah, please do. I'm always glad to help you. I can't say anything else other than that, but glad to help.
We'll keep that under wraps. Yeah.
Well, some of our local guys with a kind of a dusty bottle bourbon shop have just gotten in trouble. Apparently, they're potentially involved in some counterfeit bourbon. So hopefully it's not the case. But
random story, because we're trying to wrap this up, but you just refreshed it in my mind, and I have to say it now. So along those lines, I just saw I'm here in the West Coast, and some Oregon state officials were utilizing their resources. They worked for the alcohol division, and they were utilizing the people they knew to get a hold of bottles of Pappy.
Yeah. Well, a couple of years ago, some guys stole Pappy right out of the Buffalo Trace, and they hid it under a tarp at the back of their house. So it didn't take them long to solve that caper. But yeah, some of these my friend was trying to find me a white Weller the other day, and he texted me back from his sources like, he's got one for $650. And I was like, I'm gonna pass. I think if my wife finds out about that one, that's probably over the credit limit for bottles of bourbon. But
yeah, the spousal compliance department is a department we want to cross. Yep.
Yeah, she doesn't know what I've spent on bourbon, but I don't think I've gone over $250 a bottle. So I I'm hoping that it'll just continue to increase in growth. So.
It's like art, right? You can invest into.
It's like the stock market.
It is, yes, just exactly like that.
Yeah.
All right, man. Trey, I appreciate it. It's always good talking to you, man.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Anytime. This concludes episode number 31 for the National Land Realty Podcast, discussing what land professionals bring to the table with Trey McCallie from Lexington, Kentucky. You can learn more about land ownership or the buying and selling of land at nationalland.com.